shocked when Johnson accepted. The Johnson nomination has always been a mystery because the Kennedy brothers made the decision in secret and vowed never to tell what happened. But one other person did hear parts of their private conversation at the Biltmore Hotel, Evelyn Lincoln.
And when I came in there, they were huddled together closely on the bed discussing this tremendous issue about Lyndon B. Johnson being on the ticket. Bobby would get up and go look out the window and stare. Kennedy would sit there and think. It was intense. In fact, they hardly knew I came into the room. They were so engrossed in their conversation. That went on for 30 minutes, trying to figure out how they could maneuver to get it so he wouldn't be on the ticket.
Evelyn Lincoln says that what she heard that day convinced her the Kennedys were being blackmailed.
One of the factors that made John F. Kennedy choose Lyndon B. Johnson for vice president were the malicious rumors that were fed to Lyndon B. Johnson by J. Edgar Hoover about his womanizing. And so that's one of the reasons that pushed him to go down and offer him the vice presidency. Lyndon B. Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover had boxed them into a hole. They were absolutely boxed in.
And so history was made. Lyndon Johnson ran on the Democratic ticket and eventually became the 36th President of the United States. The Kennedys may have kept their secret, but more than 30 years later, the one surviving eyewitness has broken her silence.
Robert Kennedy said, "We both promised each other that we'd never tell what happened that day."
But I am telling what happened.
1 week after the death of JFK, Lyndon Johnson placed a call to J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI. The Kennedys had kept Hoover at arm's length, dangerous as a rattlesnake he'd once been called. But that wasn't Johnson's style. He wanted to keep Hoover inside the tent, as this curious little exchange illustrates.
You're more than the head of the Federal Bureau as far as I'm concerned. You're my brother and personal friend, and you have been for 25, 30 years. I got more confidence in your judgment than anybody in town, and I certainly appreciate your confidence. Well, thank you. Thank you.
We are especially fortunate to have Mr. Hoover's strong personal dedication to maintaining the high standards of protection for civil liberties of the individual under our system of law.
The answer is vigorous law enforcement.
That's the only answer.
That's the only answer.
How about justice? You hear a lot about justice with law enforcement.
Justice is merely incidental to law and order. Law and order is what covers the whole picture.
The President would like to talk to Mr. J. Edgar Hoover. Thank you.
Hello, Edgar. I don't hear you well. What's the matter? You got this phone tapped? No. I'm wondering if our wires are tapped at all. Every time I say something in the State Department, I read about it. And it's getting me frightened to even take a call.
I was in the room in Johnson's bedroom with Johnson and John Connally, the three of us alone, on the morning of the nomination for the vice presidency at about 10:30. When Bobby Kennedy stormed in and started screaming at Johnson that if he knew what was good for him, he'd get off that ticket.
Well, Johnson did not like Bobby Kennedy, and it was mutual. They hated each other. So what happened was that Mr. Rayburn and John Connally went in to meet with Bobby Kennedy.
Bobby Kennedy said that all hell had broken loose on the convention floor and that Johnson was going to have to withdraw, just change his mind and not accept the vice presidency. And Mr. Rayburn looked at him and he said, "Oh," and uttered an expletive that I'm not going to use.
Old man Rayburn said, "Shit, Sonny," and kicked him out.
And I am grateful, finally, that I can rely in the coming months on many others, on a distinguished running mate who brings unity and strength to our platform and our ticket, Lyndon Johnson.
And that was a real transformation in which this young pup, Jack Kennedy, suddenly is it. And he, Lyndon Johnson, big old clumsy Lyndon Johnson, is playing second fiddle. And you got to believe it, that those vice presidential years were agony for him.
It was a terrible sense of having lost that center of dominance. And suddenly I think he felt like a little kid looking in a glass door at the candy display inside, and he couldn't quite reach it. It was devastating.
It wasn't the way the president treated him. I think Jack Kennedy treated him with due respect. But everybody around Kennedy kind of poked fun at him and made mockery of whatever happened to Lyndon Johnson.
And Kennedy, you know, named him the head of the Space Center. Plus, he sent him on every foreign trip in the history of the world to, you know, try to give him something to do.
Vice President Johnson made ceremonial visits to 26 countries. But he wasn't the kind of man who could get the feel for another culture. Wherever he went, he took his own oversized bed, a special nozzle for his shower, dozens of cases of Cutty Sark, and thousands of personally inscribed ballpoint pens and cigarette lighters as gifts. But at least abroad, he was center stage. At home, there were still the Kennedys. Urbane, charismatic, immensely popular.
He was consumed with this passion of inferiority towards the Kennedys. And they gave him a very hard time when he was vice president. They were going to dump him from their ticket. They made a buffoon of him, a laughingstock, when, as Vice President of the United States, he visited Scandinavia. Bobby Kennedy sent an uncoded telegram to the embassies, uncoded so that everyone could see it, saying that the Vice President in no way speaks for the government of the United States and is not to be received as if he were an emissary of the President.
As the forces hostile to Kennedy grew in strength and number, they began to think the unthinkable: assassination. Finally, a new imperative forced their hand.
Lyndon Johnson was in big trouble. The Bobby Baker scandal and the Billy Celeste scandal could destroy Lyndon Johnson's career. Lyndon Johnson would go to jail, and he was their man. He represented all these right-wing forces. There was an urgency to kill President Kennedy. They had to save Lyndon Johnson. The governor of Texas, first of all, is Lyndon Johnson's best friend in history. They went back decades together. In the 1948 vote scandal, John Connally was every much a part of that cover-up that took place. He was his campaign manager. It is without question John Connally who entices John F. Kennedy to Texas. Once they get him there, then they're in control of everything. Motorcade routes, the evidence, the Dallas police, everything. It's their land. It's their territory. Lyndon Johnson and his Texas cronies suckered President Kennedy to Texas.
Actually, Lyndon Baines Johnson had at least one thing in common with John F. Kennedy.
He was a great womanizer, and was someone who, when they tell him about John Kennedy's womanizing, he'd bang the table and say, "Damn it to hell, I had more women by accident than he ever had on purpose."
The stories of Johnson's affairs are like the man himself, larger than life, and somewhat less than refined. Like Kennedy, LBJ allegedly used his secretaries for more than taking dictation.
I was told on good authority that he had sex with a secretary. Johnson came in her office one day, and the story goes that he pulled down the shades, locked the door, and they had sex on a desk in the White House. But that apparently was a one-time thing. It wasn't a sustained relationship.
But Johnson reportedly had extended affairs with at least 2 women back home in Texas.
As old as I am and as long as it's been, my toes still turn up when I think of him.
Madeline Brown was a 23-year-old radio advertising sales representative when she met Congressman Lyndon Johnson at a station party. A few weeks later, he invited her to another party at the Driscoll Hotel in Austin.
And while I was dancing with him,